Hey there, 1B peeps. I'm here to give you a quick rundown on the introduction to argumentation slides. Now, I know some of you may have seen these in class already. If everything went well, though, you should have seen the Monty Python clip before, which has a really humorous take on what people think argumentation is. Now, our job in this class is to make sure that we know how to argue effectively and to know the different strategies and the different tools that are used in arguing. This is really good when you have to write in other classes, but also when you have to persuade people in general. So let's get on with it. So what is an argument? Well, it's a lot more than what you saw in the Monty Python skit. You know, some of you are already familiar with Monty Python. You've seen Holy Grail, or some of their other movies. That's a real kind of humorous look at it, but there's a big point behind it, and that is that the word means lots of different things to lots of different people. But what is considered academic argument or persuasive and compelling argument, and not just shouting or bullying or name calling, is a whole different story, and we're here to make sure that we understand that. So, according to Monty Python, or at least the character who wants the argument, they're more than just contradicting somebody, just saying, no, 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 you're not. There's got to be a collected statement, series of statements that establish a definite proposition, a point of view. In other words, these statements support something larger that they're trying to persuade you of. And there are a couple fundamental claims that come out of this. One is that arguments are more than contradiction. They involve claims about what it means to be in the world, the meaning that we find in the world. It also means that arguments are an essential and instinctual activity. We're kind of hardwired to want to persuade people. And we use all kinds of different ways of persuading people. I mean, this class isn't about like persuading people by force. It's about through using the mind and the other tools of legitimate persuasion. Finally, the meaning that comes out of an argument and out of the statements that support a certain position or a certain thesis statement, they depend on context, perspective, and form. And another important point is that they're often framed or presented in such a way that certain values or stakes are introduced, and that certain points of view or conclusions are emphasized and highlighted by the end. You know, one argument cannot do all things for all people. So that's where audience comes in, and that's where shared common ground and anchors come in, and also the argumentative tools that come in. And we'll be getting to that in just a second. So what kinds of arguments are being followed in these examples? Now, if you're wearing a Panthers cap, that's a kind of argument in and of itself. It could be an argument that's up for interpretation, but it's an argument nonetheless. It may be that, you know, hey, I go to Chaffey College. It could be I'm on the Chaffey baseball team, or I'm a big supporter of Chaffey College. In general, something positive about Chaffey. It could also mean somebody gave me this cap, I found it, maybe I got it at a thrift store. But there are assumptions that we make in the physical world when we see something with, you know, words on it. The way we present ourselves, too, is a form of argument in a way. Here we have some very classic-looking punks. And they're putting forward a certain kind of style, too. And that could be that they enjoy punk music. It could also mean that, you know, they have a certain set of political views that get associated with punk rock. But even that's an assumption that can be taken all kinds of different perspectives. Some punk rock is anarchist. Some is anti-establishment. Some is actually very progressive. If you look across the whole, if you want to call it spectrum of punk rock, it's all over the political bandwidth, you know, from very traditionalist and conservative to very progressive and very liberal. So again, arguments need some kind of anchor or something that helps us understand where to begin with it and what the assumptions are in it. Coming up next, a Colin Kaepernick jersey. It could mean that you are a 49ers fan or a Kaepernick journey, but a Kaepernick fan. But if you're wearing one after he took a knee, it's pretty likely people are going to see you as presenting another kind of argument. Not only that maybe you appreciate him as a good football player, but that you endorse what he's saying when he took a knee, that there is, there's a systemic sense of racism against African Americans, especially in relationship to police forces. And there, that visual argument depends on context, a certain time and place, right? If you're wearing this before that time, before that moment of him taking the knee, they might be like, yeah, Kaepernick, yeah, he's pretty good. But afterwards, again, that time context makes a huge difference. Just like if you were the first punk rocker, people might not know what to think of you. But if you're a punk rocker now, hey, malls have Hot Topic, punk rock is something that people are at least kind of vaguely familiar with. Everything that's on the outside becomes the inside sooner or later. The car you drive, whether it's a Tesla or it's a Ford Super Duty, those are arguments in and of itself. How you might feel about the environment or about your wealth, or about, reducing fossil fuels. The Ford Super Duty, again, on the other hand, might be presenting a certain other kind of argument, hey, I'm tough, I'm rugged, I'm not to be messed with, or at its most utilitarian level, I need to drag big things to and from work or home. But again, we talked about this before. Maybe it's a trophy truck, and that's a whole different kind of argument, right? It's a very, very clean truck. Now, the article you read for Rebecca Jones says that, we often think about argument as a battle or as a war, but she doesn't like that. She thinks it can be productive if people agree on some primary standpoint. And if they're willing to actually back off and back up for a second and say, you're right, I was wrong on that point, I concede that. If they're willing to do that, then an argument can be productive. It doesn't mean necessarily everybody gets what they want out of it, but that there's some greater understanding. Now, public arguments in our society rarely go this way, though. So here's an example of that unproductive debate. So let's get this on there.
And now, cable news. It is a violation of the Employment Clause of the Constitution. You see the relevancy of this engagement. Somebody tell me where it's what you see. You see the relevancy of the argument here.
That has hurt so many Americans over the last 5 years who believe that.
We just played it.
I thought the Twitch rallies done.
You don't love what rail. You know you're really on the rail.
That's not true.
Where does the bus stop right now?
Whoa. So that's a whole lot to take in there. For some reason, we went right back to the beginning. So let me just bang through this again. Do you hear me crush that can during it? Sorry about that. It was sparkling water, I swear. But the whole point of what I put up there is that basically there are ways to argue effectively, and then there are ways to just totally be ineffective rationally and according to the rules of good argument. So, we want to be good arguers and really put forward, our best selves in order to make, a better society. We have to make our arguments productive in the way beyond like the either or battle perspective with winners and losers. You can find things that you agree with people that you think you don't have anything to agree with if you go back far enough to find a shared value. And that's really important. Just shouting at each other is rarely, rarely helpful. So Rebecca Johnson also says that we have to consider how authors or speakers are using rhetorical techniques to persuade an audience. So that's where a critical thinking toolbox comes in. That includes classical appeals. Aristotle, some of you may already know this guy, he came up with 3 big ones: pathos, ethos, and logos. Some of you are like, oh, I've been getting this since middle school. That's okay, a little bit of review. And again, these are tools. They're neither inherently good nor bad, but how we use them and how we understand them can determine whether we're using them for good, honest, helpful ends or manipulative ends. So let's talk a little bit about pathos. Pathos is about emotional appeals that make a certain emotional response: anger, sympathy, happiness, sadness, desire. It's not necessarily negative. I mean, how we emotionally react to things can often be a really good and important part of ourselves, but we have to balance that out with the others. Pathos also describes use of humor to reach audiences. And now with these emotional bonds that are created by appeals to emotion, help build bridges and use what are called anchors. And sometimes getting people to share an emotional state leads them to thinking about other things that they share, values, certain suppositions or assumptions they make about human beings or about life. And again, these anchors can be beliefs, values, attitudes, or behaviors, or group norms. Emotion and emotional appeals, pathos, helps to access that kind of thing. Now let's consider this. There's an argument being made by pedigree here. Whoops.
What I don't know is how I ended up in here. But I know that I am a good dog, and I just want to go home. When you buy Pedigree, we make a donation to help shelter dogs find loving homes. The Pedigree Adoption Drive. Help us help dogs.
So hopefully I cut that off at a good place. Now, that's a very moving commercial, and it certainly does use pathos to help us think about it. Now, what you need to ask yourself is it being used validly, or is it manipulating you, or is it somewhere in between? And this is one of the questions we're going to be asking ourselves again and again in this class. Not necessarily about pedigree. So, to humanize an argument, you can also have logical claims. And if decisions are paced in part by emotion, logical arguments can actually work with emotional appeals. But too much feeling can cross the line, Here we often see emotional appeals in relationship to human rights. But the strongest ones are those that go back to logic as well, go back to logos, and go back to a shared anchor in terms of a belief in human rights for everyone, or the right to citizenship, the right to try to make things better for yourself. Human dignity as a universal value, for example. Now, ethos, some people think it means ethics. What it really means is the credibility and trust of the speaker. And ethics, their morality can be part of it, but that's not the only thing. Looks like I'm going to be running right up to time here, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it here, and I'll pick up again in part 2.